Okay, I'm Marc Chase with the Times of Northwest Indiana. I'm joined today by Brian Howey of Howey Politics Indiana. Brian, good to have you here.
Great to be here.
Brian's a statewide political analyst and columnist, has a lot of great insights, and we wanted to bring him on board to talk a little bit about our campaign finance project, where we've been taking a look at some of the state's largest political campaign funds. The Governor's Fund, the House Republican Campaign Committee, and some of the other really big legislative funds that funnel a lot of money into local races.
And the best way to follow Indiana politics is follow the money.
Very good. Well, we appreciate you coming on to talk to us today. Let's start out just about a little bit about the Northwest Indiana impact on this political money landscape. People don't really think of Northwest Indiana when they think of a lot of the money going into state politics, but there's one region businessman in particular, Dean White, big billionaire hotel hospitality mogul, some advertising in his business, and he is the number one or number two contributor to a lot of these larger Republican funds in the state, which of course we know the Republicans are sort of the power structure. Talk a little bit about the significance of Mr. White, his campaign donations, and what might that mean to Northwest Indiana?
Well, I mean, he is in a league all by himself, with the $775,000 that he's put in the governor's campaign, $1 million to the state Republican committee, more to the House Republicans and the Senate Republicans. I mean, the
millions of dollars over the last 4 years.
Yes, yeah. The man is kind of in a league of his own. I mean, he's Sequoia, whereas the rest of the field are, oak trees and that kind of thing. There's no Democratic counterpart to him. So he, by himself, has positioned the Republican various political committees into a much better position, and I think it has translated into the supermajorities that we're seeing not only in the General Assembly, but the Republicans also dominate the congressional delegation and also the constitutional offices at the State House.
How much can somebody like Dean White expect to get out of those kind of donations? A lot of people joke, hey, he's a billionaire, he could shake some of this money out of his couch. But how significant is that to him, and what kind of access or influence can that buy?
Well, I've never met Dean White. I don't think I could pick him out of a crowd, so I'm not really sure what's in it for him, other than maybe the one conspicuous thing that happened was after the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, the fix came about. You had to think that him being in the hospitality industry may have had an impact on convincing the governor to maybe go along with the fix after there was a national uproar over it.
Yeah, you had others there too that may have played into that we talked about before. Bill Osterle, I think I'm saying that right, from Angie's List. Mm-hmm. He was a vocal critic of the RFRA law after the big public stir occurred with it. He's also in the top 20 campaign donors for Governor Pence.
150,000?
Yeah, and Dean White is number one for the governor. So is it legitimate to think that, hey, maybe the quick fix that they did to fix the language of RFRA, maybe some of those dollars had something to do with it?
May have. I also thought that the legislative leadership, Speaker Brian Bosma and Senate President David Long, certainly got on board with the fix. They were kind of amazed at the governor's appearance on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, in which he kind of had a hard time dealing with some of the questions there. I think that put the legislative leaders into a situation where they knew there was a national firestorm going. You had the NCAA Final Four in town. You had a huge contingent of national media there, sure. And then you had people like Dean White and Bill Osterle who may have said we've got to do something about this. So the pressure points came in a variety of ways.
There were a lot of potential impacts to that, sure. Back on Dean White, we never really got off of him, but if you take Dean White out of the equation for Northwest Indiana, the percentages of money that are coming to these big campaign funds from addresses in Lake, Porter, LaPorte counties is actually very small. What kind of an impact does that have on a region's political fortunes if they don't have a whole lot of financial skin in the campaign game?
Well, That's a good question, and I think the fact is that a lot of his money ended up in campaigns with Hal Slager, Niemeyer, Bill Fine. I mean, they played a role in forging of this huge supermajority in the Indiana House. Remember, the Indiana House prior to 2010 used to kind of swing back and forth. Governor Daniels was in office for 8 years, and 4 of those years the Democrats controlled the Indiana House. So that kind of money, the fact that a lot of legislative Republican leaders are in safe districts, they all kicked a lot of money back into the House Republican Campaign Committee, which then filtered back to the Hal Slagers of the world, the Michael Aylesworths of the world,
Sure.
And that basically gave the Republicans even more of a cushion.
And that's a big way that those funds work, right? It's sort of a central bank. The House Republican Campaign Fund, for instance, is a central bank for House candidates for the Republican Party throughout the state. And if you're in a safe district and you've raised a certain amount of money that you don't need, that gets kicked to the big fund that can be redistributed elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the money that came from individual legislative leaderships like Bill Friend, Judd McMillan, Kathy Craig Richardson. They all raised a lot of money on their own, and then none of them had credible opponents. Some of them were unopposed, and so that money was kicked back to the House Republican Campaign Committee.
Okay.
So that's a luxury the Republicans have.
Okay. Well, I mean, let's talk a little bit more about the House Republican Campaign Committee. $9 million over the 4 years, much smaller than the governor's $19 million over the same time period, but still significant money, especially to local races. You mentioned the impact on some of the local races. For Representative Hal Slager from Schererville, I believe there was maybe 40% of his, 40 to 50% of his campaign was funded through the House Republican Campaign Committee over the last 4 years. The war chests of Michael Aylesworth from Hebron, for instance, 70% of his campaign money came from that one committee that we've been talking about. With those kinds of dollars, does that provide legislative strings to the leadership that distribute the money to basically rein in their members?
Yeah. When you look at the recipients of the House Republican Campaign Committee, Hal Slager, 147,000, Julie Olthoff, 82,000, Bill Fine, 76,000, Soliday, Ed Soliday, 83,000, Michael Aylesworth, 89. I mean, when you add all that up, that's close to $500,000.
It is. It's almost $500,000.
And then you look at where that money came from. Dr. Tim Brown, 242,000. He's head of the Ways and Means Committee. Jerry Torr, 93,000. Judd McMillan, who's Majority Floor Leader, 109,000. That's a lot of money flowing in from leadership, and might give credence to the fact that maybe independent redistricting, the redistricting commission, might be a good thing, because there are a lot of legislative leaders that are in safe districts. They don't have either they don't have an opponent or they don't have an credible opponent, and you're seeing a lot of money sloshing back, and it's allowing them to forge the supermajorities that we're seeing now, and that of course paves the way for things like the RFRA thing that happened. They're insulated. They're not really feeling the wrath or the nuances of voters.
That's interesting because, of course, the legislators that we've spoken to deny this, and, I'm not sure what's right. But when you look at the kind of money that was coming in from these state party leadership style funds, these caucus style funds, a lot of people thought, hey, maybe that's why the local contingent of Republicans were so quick to vote for RFRA in the first place, because all this money is attached to by the leadership. These are strings that they can pull, and they need to fall in line whether they actually agreed with the legislation or not. And any thoughts on that?
Well, the RFRA thing happened so quickly. It kind of passed, and then the governor had the signing ceremony. We call it the Last Supper photo, where they had all the religious figures,
the clergy,
that came together, and the optics of that thing were pretty jarring to a lot of people. I think the Constitutional Marriage Amendment, HJR 3, that played out the year before, we kept hearing from Republicans around the state. They were kind of telling me and my reporter Matt Butler and Maureen Hayden from CNHI, we wish it would just go away. But it was kind of like they were whispering, and yet there was something that took a lot of time, took a lot of energy, and a lot of them went with the program on that. Although you did see some like Representative Mahan, Representative Wendy McNamara, from some of the smaller towns like Hartford City and Mount Vernon who raised some questions about it, particularly that second sentence. So I actually think that we saw more of that with HJR3 than we did with RFRA.
Okay. That's interesting. Talking a little bit, let's move a little bit over to the governor's fund. It's the largest one we